So the next thing we're going to talk about is maintaining interest. We talked about this a little bit in the last PowerPoint slides because maintaining interest is essential for kids, especially at this age. The benefits is that children that like to read are going to read more, and the more they read, the more language they're going to be exposed to. Okay, so if they're reading a lot, they're going to see new words. They're going to remember the words. Like I said earlier, it takes kids with language disorders 3 times as much exposure as typically developing kids to learn a new word or grammatical concept. And so the more they read, the more that's going to be drilled into them. But also, once they get to elementary school, they're going to transition from that I'm learning how to read mode to now I'm reading in order to learn things, right? So you're going to be reading your history textbook in order to learn about history. So in preschool, they're still in that learning to read stage. And this is the most important stage because this is where you're teaching them to like to read and to make reading less challenging, because if they don't like to read, they're not going to want to read, and then it's going to be hard because they're not going to get practice. Versus if they like to read, then they're going to read more, they're going to get better at it because they're practicing, and then the more they read, the more language they're exposed to. It's a positive cycle. We talked about it last week, I think. I pre-recorded that video like a couple months ago, so I couldn't tell you right now. And then also it's rewarding to you as a language facilitator, because if you're reading a story and nobody's responding back, and they're all just talking to each other and running around the room, then it's just uncomfortable and you feel like you're not really like making a difference. Versus if you can maintain their interest, then it feels better for you because you feel like you're doing something successful. You feel like the kids are interested in what you have to say, and it's more fun too. So in order to get kids into the book, to maintain their interest even before you start, you're going to want to prep the kids. So you're going to have them all sit down in circle time. In my undergrad, we sang a lot of songs for transition times. So we would sing like, everybody gather around, it's time to read a story. And then we would sit down. We would sing the song as the kids were coming to sit down. We would remind them, right before we start reading, like, okay guys, now we're gonna read a story. Remember, if you want to ask something or answer a question, what should you do? And then wait, and usually the kids will yell out, raise your hand, and then you could say, oh my goodness, you just shouted the answer. Everybody practice, we need to raise our hands, right? That's a really good example of reminding kids what to do, because when you ask that question to the group, everybody's going to shout it out. And so by them being corrected right then, oh no, you don't shout it out, raise your hand, they remember before the story even starts that that's the expectation. And then also remind them, okay, during the story, stay quiet, sit crisscross applesauce, and keep your hands to yourself. This is a very exciting book. I love this book. This book is about Curious George going to the zoo. That's crazy. Have you ever heard of a monkey going to the zoo? I haven't. I've only heard of monkeys living at the zoo. Okay, let's find out what happens. And then, like I said earlier, sometimes it can be beneficial to, I have a book here, just flip through the pictures a little bit and say like, oh, look what's happening. He's going on a walk with his mom. I wonder what's going to happen in this story, right? And so you're just kind of giving them a foreshadowing of what's to come. And then as you're reading the story, like we talked about earlier in this lecture, you're going to be asking them questions that are appropriate, mixing them up between simple, complex, and the type of question, and make sure that you're involving all the kids at different times. So if you're asking your first question, you ask these 2 kids. If you're asking your second question, these 2, and your third question, these 2, so that all the kids are getting a turn. And then make sure that you're including all the strategies discussed last week with your facial expressions, gestures, tone, pitch, loudness, and rate. And that should all help them stay engaged before and during the reading. The next thing we're going to talk about is visual aids and manipulations, which I think is so much fun. It takes a lot of prep work, but it's so worth it in the end for the most part. So the benefits is that it's going to keep the kids involved. It's going to make new ideas more clear because they're actually holding and touching something. And it makes it more like dimensional because then they're like actually tactily learning versus just auditory and visual, right? So I just did that backwards because I'm so tired today. Visual and auditory. So when they're seeing the pictures, hearing the words, but then also touching something that is demonstrating what you're doing, it's going to maintain their attention, give them energy up in learning, and make ideas more clear. And it also keeps you on track to make sure that all the kids are getting a turn to pay attention and participate, and gives you a reason to pause and make sure you've asked all your questions. So when to use these? When I was an undergrad, we did it pretty much every week just because my professor felt like it was really beneficial to the kids, but you don't have to do it every week. It's best to use if you're introducing a new or complicated idea. Or if you have a kid that's not super integrating, they get really bored or checked out, low attention span, kids with ADHD, but also kids with very low language, because if they don't understand anything that's happening in the story, then they're going to tune out. But if they have something to look forward to of like, oh, I'm going to pin this up on the board, then they're going to pay more attention because they're going to want you to pick them, and they're going to have to interact with an item in some way. So it's going to give them exposure to that word. So if you are there in the morning and you flip through the book and you are looking around and you see something that you think you can use, just use it, right? So the puppets that are in Miss Hernandez's room, you could use those for like vet week or doctor week. Pull out one of the stuffed animals in the vet, and then as you're reading the story, be like, oh, the vet's gonna check out the animal, and maybe you have the stethoscope and be like, oh, Victoria, come here, like put on the stethoscope, listen to the animal's heart. Like as in the story, it's walking through like, listen to the animal's heart, listen to their lungs. So as the doctor in the story is doing that, you have the kids come up and practice on the animal. But make sure it's not distracting from the story or facilitating language. Make sure that it's actually benefiting and not deterring. So how to use this is you're going to explain before the story starts what the visual or manipulation is and clear boundaries about it. So if you're going to say, okay, today I have my doctor and I have my kitty, and I need the doctor to check out the kitty. Make sure that you're only talking if I call on you. Like, I need all of you guys to be helper doctors today. And then call on the children to participate and make sure they're not standing up out of turn. That can happen a lot, especially with kids with ADHD or other learning disabilities that causes them to have a lower attention span. They might just get impatient and just stand up and want to do it. So make sure that you're reminding kids like it's not your turn yet, and call on the kids to participate with a variety. And then I love this third point. This is kind of a preview for our behavior management lesson that we're going to have in a few weeks. But use the children with good behavior as an example. So if kids are talking or like pushing each other with their hands, like those kids are not going to be the kids that you pick to come up. I know that sometimes that can be like really tempting to be like, okay, like this kid's being so ornery, like I'm going to call on him to come up so that he can just like become re-engaged and then he can sit down again. But the thing is that the kids are usually going to want to participate a lot in this, and so you're going to want to use it as a reward. So if the kids are sitting crisscross applesauce with their hands in their lap, they've been raising their hand and they're quiet and listening, then those are going to be the kids that you're going to call on first, because then the kids who have trouble paying attention are going to start having good behavior. And then when you see the trouble kid having good behavior, you're going to immediately call on them, right? So if they're usually moving around, but then you see all of a sudden, like they really want to participate, so they're like sitting with their hands in their lap, their legs crossed, and they're looking at you, like you're going to call on them that time, because if you wait, then they might start acting up again, and so you're going to lose that opportunity. But also, you're not going to reward them for the good behavior, right? They were being good for a reason, because they wanted the reward. And so I think that that's an important thing to just keep in the back of your brain.